Has Bradley Beal already made a decision on his no trade clause? And does that mean Jimmy Butler is stuck with the Miami Heat? I'm Trevor Lane. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you subscribe right here to the channel. Turn on those notifications as well. So here's what's going on. ESPN's Brian Windhorst gave us an update on both the Bradley Beal situation. The Phoenix Suns need to get Bradley Beal off the roster if they want to bring in Jimmy Butler. Butler's rumored to want to go to Phoenix, both because he wants to play with Kevin Durant and because he wants to get a big paycheck, which owner Matt Ishbia is rumored to be willing to give him in Phoenix. Other teams not so willing to give him that next big contract, but it's all going to hinge upon Bradley Beal. So here's what Brian Windhorst of ESPN had to say about the situation and where this could all be heading, and it could be a very uncomfortable place.
Bradley Beal be on the move?
Sounds like no. His agent, Mark Bartelstein, told me there's been no discussions either with the Suns or any other team about Bradley Beal waiving his no-trade clause. The reason that's become an issue over the last couple of days, the Heat said they were going to trade Jimmy Butler. The Suns are known to be interested. The only way to get him is to move Bradley Beal, which would take Beal's cooperation. Right now, that is not even a consideration, according to Mark Bartelstein. He's just focused on helping the Suns turn things around.
Okay, you're talking about trades. You mentioned the Jimmy Butler thing. That clearly is what everyone around the league and all the fans have been talking about. What is the latest on Butler and the Heat and the trade request?
I've spent all week on the phone on this, Greeny, and from my discussions, I don't think the Heat have any traction. I don't think there's any deal that they like. I don't think there's many teams that are offering them anything that they consider any actionable thing. I think the Heat are preparing for a future with Jimmy Butler back on the roster. We'll see if that can get worked out, because obviously he's in the midst of a 7-game suspension.
Oh, after all of this, the Heat are preparing for a future with Jimmy Butler on the roster. What would that look like? Well, first and foremost, let's talk about the Bradley Beal situation. I mean, oh boy, what a mess that whole thing is. So Bradley Beal right now under contract, obviously not the kind of money the Phoenix Suns would like to be spending on him, especially now that he's coming off the bench for Phoenix, as soon sort of a super sixth man for them. Bradley Beal making over $50 million this season. You look at where he's at right now, $50.2 million. Next season, $53.6. Season after that, he's making $57 million. And it's a player option just to add insult to injury. So Bradley Beal, but the biggest thing is he's got a no trade clause. He can end any trade discussion. If he says, no, I don't want to leave Phoenix, that's it. He doesn't leave Phoenix. There's nothing. I mean, Phoenix can bench him, and there were rumors that perhaps part of the reason why they were bringing him off the bench was to, maybe nudge him towards wanting to leave Phoenix, although there has been quite a bit of pushback against that type of thinking. But still, Bradley Beal, if he decides he does not want to leave the Phoenix Suns, doesn't want to go anywhere else, well, then that's that. End of story. The Phoenix Suns need Bradley Beal to be willing to waive that no trade clause. But the challenge is finding a team that will take him. Look, there's a reason why Miami doesn't just swap Jimmy Butler for Bradley Beal. You need 3 teams in the deal, but still, there's a reason why Miami's not doing that, because they don't want Beal's contract. His no trade clause perpetuates, even if he waives it to get to, let's say, Miami or LA or Denver, wherever it is he's trying to get to go, that no trade clause will still exist. And we see what a problem it is already for the Phoenix Suns. Other teams see it and say, no, thank you. We don't want any of that. Not only do they not necessarily want to pay $50 million for Bradley Beal, he's a good player. Is he worth $50 million? No. But that no trade clause is a big, big challenge and a major hurdle in the Phoenix Suns acquiring Jimmy Butler. If Beal didn't have that no trade, maybe this is done already. But if the Phoenix Suns aren't going to get Jimmy Butler, and we just talked about yesterday that Jimmy is actually scaring off other teams, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Memphis Grizzlies. Jimmy Butler is telling those teams, do not trade for me. I don't want to be on your team. And nobody wants a pissed off Jimmy Butler on their team. That is more of a headache than it's worth. And so the Grizzlies, they are out. They're out on Jimmy, but they're going to focus on Cam Johnson. They're going to focus on Brandon Ingram, someone else on the wing rather than Jimmy Butler. So he's actively scaring away some teams. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Suns, where he wants to go, in part because they'll pay him, they'll give him his next big contract. They're one of the few teams out there that are willing to do that. Well, the Suns can't get him unless Beal is willing to go to a team that is willing to take him. And finding a solution to both, finding number one, a team that wants Bradley Beal in his current contract, and number two, that team being a team Bradley Beal wants to go to, that's a major hurdle to getting something done here. So is the end result after all of this, as Brian Windhorst just suggested, that simply Jimmy Butler is stuck? That could be where this ultimately winds up. And I still think at some point he's going to wind up getting moved. I don't think we're ultimately going to wind up in the situation where he is completely stuck. It would not surprise me at all if the Warriors come around. They seem to be an ideal landing spot for him. But once again, if the Warriors have decided also that they don't want to be the team to give Jimmy Butler his next contract, well, then that could be a major sticking point. But if you look at Jimmy right now, $52.4 million player option for next season. And as Brian Windhorst just noted, the Miami Heat are preparing for life with Jimmy Butler on the roster because so far the offers have simply not been very good. Now, we also have to remember this time of year, we are a month out from the trade deadline. This is the time of year when there's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of smoke screens out there. So if you're Miami and you've gotten offers, you've gotten calls, and they sure as hell have. They've gotten a lot of offers, a lot of calls on Jimmy Butler, but none of them are meeting the standard that you'd like to be met in order to move him. Well, you might just throw out there that, maybe we'll just hang on to him. Maybe we'll just keep him after all. And let's prepare for life with Jimmy still on this roster. Now, that said, if I'm an opposing team right now, I know the situation. I know Jimmy's a pain in the ass for the Miami Heat currently. And and look, by the way, the Miami Heat are not blameless in this situation. This is not all on Jimmy, right? Some of this is on Miami. You can make the argument that Jimmy's not really the one in the wrong, that Miami should have already done things to better support him, should have already done things to upgrade their roster. There are two sides to this, of course. But Miami putting that out there, that, we don't like any of the offers and we may just wind up keeping him, that tells you that a lot of teams, as they should, are trying to lowball the Miami Heat. Why? Because it looks like they are desperate sellers. After all, they run the risk of losing him for nothing in the offseason. Yes, the only teams out there with cap space are the Brooklyn Nets and the Washington Wizards, neither of which should have any interest. Please, God, do not have any interest in Jimmy Butler, either one of you. Both of those teams should be full in on the rebuild and doing that, not trying to trade for an aging player like Jimmy Butler. So these are teams that would not have interest in him, which means Jimmy, if he wants to get more than a mid-level exception, he needs the Heat's help anyway. Would have to be a sign and trade. So Miami is, on one hand, not that worried about losing Jimmy Butler because they know that he needs their help to go anywhere. But on the other, if I'm an opposing team, I'm telling Miami, look, we don't really want to give Jimmy a big contract on his next deal. So we're going to offer you less than if he was already settled contractually. If he was already set on a longer term deal, we're going to offer you less than if he was on a reasonable contract right now, because we know that not only do we have to give up stuff for him, but we're going to have to pay him on his next contract, and that lowers his value to us if we believe that the contract he's signing may not be so great towards the end of it, particularly as he gets older, later into his 30s, 35 years old. Jimmy says he's still in his prime. I don't blame him for saying stuff like that right now, but I don't think a lot of NBA teams are buying it, and that's why teams aren't lining up to give him that $50+ million contract for the remaining 4 years or whatever that they could potentially give him on a new deal. So could the Miami Heat actually wind up stuck with Jimmy Butler and Jimmy stuck with the Miami Heat? Sure, it definitely could happen. But right now, to me, this all comes across as a lot of posturing, as Miami wanting teams to up the offer, because so far teams are giving pretty sharky offers to Miami, as well they should, given the way the situation has gone. But right now, whatever offers are out there are simply not enough to get Miami to move on from Jimmy Butler. And then there's the big question of, will Jimmy even accept trades to any of the non-Phoenix teams, depending on, of course, how much they're willing to give him on his next contract? All of this really comes back to that. The reason why Jimmy is at odds with the Miami Heat, despite all the things that have been said on both sides, it ultimately comes down to the Miami Heat not wanting to give Jimmy Butler the big contract that he wants on his next deal. And that is the source of all the friction here. So what will happen? I still think ultimately Jimmy gets moved, but Brian Windhorst is bringing up the possibility that now Miami and Jimmy Butler may just be stuck with each other. And the NBA's, because of their superstar resting policy, he might even have to play. Look, 7-game suspension, he'll sit for those games. But after that, the NBA might step in and say, Miami, he's a star. You have to put him on the court. we'll see where all of this goes. Remember, Miami is not in a position to tank due to the future draft capital that they owe. So this is going to be the key storyline around the NBA trade deadline to keep an eye on from here on out. And you guys know we'll be all over it here at the Basketball Bulletin. All the more reason to subscribe to the channel. Go check out our latest video breaking down the Paolo Banchero situation. Welcome back, Paulo. At least one Florida team's having a good time right now. Go check that out right now.